Hi, I'm Steve Carlson. There's been a great and even surprising interest from around the world in my video on Islam and what is going on in Europe and what it means for the United States. And now, after the Paris attacks, I want to address the question of how the United States should protect our security while still pursuing our values and our goals in the aftermath of Obama's awkward and hellish withdrawal from our military mission in Iraq and Afghanistan. Transparency, an active role for participating states, not force, no religious test, but asylum if targeted for religion or other political persecution, and finally, restoring the borders and a safe zone in Syria and Iraq, not sectarian civil war, and never manipulate or participate in a sectarian civil war, Hillary Clinton. These are the four principles which will allow us to act according to our real values and Constitution and protect the peoples of Syria and Iraq in a truly American way. What has happened here? We're still learning an amazing amount about the terrorist attacks by Syrian refugees and immigrants. So far, 129 deaths, but there could very well be more deaths from that, and ISIS has taken responsibility for it. And now people have decided that the claim was valid. They've also determined that ISIS killed 250 Russians whose crime was flying out of Egypt, over the Sinai to Russia. And they carried out a terrorist attack in Lebanon, and another one in Nigeria, etc. What is the difference is that you need to understand the concern about Europe and the United States. You need to look at the qualitative differences. First, you need to understand that terrorism is a form of warfare, asymmetric warfare. And what it is the ability to now penetrate behind enemy lines, viewing the West as the enemy of these combatants. And yes, there is a similar battle going on in Nigeria and a similar battle going on in Lebanon. But this is not asymmetrical. And so the attack into France is troubling, because it raises the issue of how do we deal with this asymmetrical warfare, where nations with a huge military can be, I wouldn't say brought to their knees, but they are severely troubled. And the peace of the population in this militarily superior country, in France, in Russia, and in the United States in 9/11, is disrupted. So it's a disruptive military attack. And now you have Barack Obama saying, what we fear, in fact he wants to put it in partisan terms, is that the Republican governors who oppose his plan, I wouldn't say strategy, his particular personal plans and ambitions, which have not been approved by and don't represent the interests of the United States, and in fact are inimical to the United States, that these governors are opposed because supposedly, he says, Republicans are afraid of 3-year-old orphans. Now this is the type of overblown hyperbole which has been there from the very beginning with Barack Obama. And without feeding the partisanship, Democrats have cheered this kind of rhetoric. They say it stirs their base. It provides the narrative that how could Republicans be that unreasonable that they would, out of fear of 3-year-old orphans, that they would subject millions of people to a brutal hell. For ISIS, they say that area is heaven. But for the millions of people that they attack and kill, it's not heaven, it's hell. And so Obama is saying, why for fear of 3-year-old orphans would you subject these millions of people to such a hell? And at some point, everybody's got to wake up. Even those who have associated politically through the Democratic Party, low for all these decades, need to wake up and realize we are being manipulated. This is a man, Obama, who makes ridiculous pseudo-arguments, which are carried by the press with approval. We have media who approve of his argument. Now, do the Republicans, or can I say it, am I allowed to say it, the American people, the American independent voters, we have to put a party organization on it? We do not fear 3-year-olds. We are a caring people. We believe in pro-life. We want to help little 3-year-old orphans. But this is a national security issue. It's not a partisan issue. It's not some little cute scheme dreamed up by the Republicans who for some reason cannot lay a glove on the great Barack Obama. No, this is a real security issue for those of you who might understand something about that. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. We've just seen it in France. And now France is joining with Russia to press the attack. But Hillary Clinton is attacking us with this. She doesn't have to talk about her emails. She wants to go on offense. So she goes on offense and attacks, basically, the American people, that we're afraid of 3-year-old orphans. Well, to begin with, there has recently been a show on Frontline, a TV show, in which a reporter who fits right in with ISIS and did a lot of reporting, and you could say he is ISIS, but he has said he was ISIS as a reporter, and he penetrated, and he showed that they are taking 5-year-old children. Again, one of these things, you see it right before your eyes on the screen. They're putting weapons in their hands. They're teaching them as children that they should become a jihadi. 3-year-old, 5-year-old kids. Now, do we fear such a 3-year-old or 5-year-old kid? They've showed, in terms of their indoctrinating their young attackers, they showed Muslim kids cutting off the heads of other children, Christian children, slaughter of children. And Barack Obama equates this behavior, this persecution, to the conduct of Americans, Christian or whatever, as if he is going to teach us, or as Farrakhan has said, judge us. So do we fear these children who are slaughtered? Well, they're not violent. What we must not tolerate is basically an international army. And we can probe and we can try to penetrate why people would behave like this. We could try to understand. I don't think that we'll ever quite get there. But what is clear is that unrestrained violence, acts of vengeance, and in the name of this religion, this simply cannot be tolerated because it will grow and grow. This is a purpose for law and order, because so that everybody will be safe and secure, even the little 3-year-old orphans, the 3-year-old, 5-year-old killers. We have to back off from the cycle of violence. And I disagree with the New York Times. Many, many, many people foresaw the chaos and the aftermath of Obama's politically motivated and highly unwise actions to attack and destroy not ISIS, not the enemy, but to attack and destroy the U.S. military campaign, thus putting the nation and the world at risk. I have said that this approaches treason, if indeed it is not a clear-cut and full-blown case. This is not the issue. The issue is not to try people for treason. The issue is to bring the actions taken in the name of the United States back into line with rationality, common sense, and certainly the safety and security of the people of the United States and our Constitution. Now, there are many people here who have never seen war except on television. They've seen it over there on the television news. It comes into their living room. It even includes Americans in it. But after the strong reaction of virtually live broadcasts from the Vietnam War, which had such a profound impact on the thinking of the American people and the course of that conflict, we have become desensitized so that we still do not respond. Even when we look at France, it's again over there. Now, we used to sing, over there, the Yanks are coming, so beware. And it seemed like a long ways away to France. Back in the days, basically before television news days, when we waited for the daily paper to hit the stand, now by the time the newspapers hit the stand, it's all old news. Newspapers are going out of business. France is a lot closer to us now. It's not over there. We're all connected. We're interconnected. It's an interconnected planet. And yet a lot of people don't get it. They don't get that there's a connection with Syria. There's a connection with the United States from France. People are already here. We've already had a number of terrorist attacks from immigrants and people who said they're refugees. This is not a good thing for civilization in the United States. And so we are compelled to view this within the framework of a military war. Obama, in Obama land, he lives in a world in which he believes he's ended the conflict. But really, his promises after he took control of that military operation, as I said, not only did he shut that down, but in the context of history, he has attacked our mission. A guy in the city today, a Somalian, pretended he was a mental case. Maybe he wasn't pretending. Once in a while, the only thing you could hear him say was, killing. He's here. I don't know how he got here. This is a guy who's actually close to a suicide bombing. He's not fitting in. He's here because they scooped up a bunch of people from there, but he didn't fit in. People talk about Steve Jobs being a Syrian refugee and then creating Apple Computer. But this is not an intelligence test. It's not a religious test. This needs to be a well-conceived and well-thought-out program that does good for people. Now, we've elected Barack Obama. I guess some people thought he was good because he had been a law student, because of affirmative action. First affirmative action law review editor for Harvard. But if you go to Harvard and these other schools and you see what these law students and these students are actually doing there, including some members, current members of our U.S. Supreme Court, it doesn't have anything to do with the law. It doesn't have anything to do with our Constitution. It has to do with them using the law as a club to hit the white man over the head, to hit the white woman over the head, to hit rich people over the head, to hit Republicans over the head because they want to vote Democrat. So they use the law to advance their political objectives. Yet when you get to the courts, political questions are supposedly kept from the courts. So why are they kept from the courts? There's a lot of important precedent, which I've read, and it is discussed in some important cases on the guarantee clause. In one case, there were 2 governors in Rhode Island, and the court had to decide which one was the real governor, and to some degree they applied a test of the duty under the Constitution of the United States to provide for free and fair elections. But basically, they used a much lower standard there. It wouldn't be a monarchy. And I don't see anything in the Constitution where it says the standard is it can't be a monarchy. That's something that had been settled well before the Constitution. And so the guarantee clause was not some kind of bar against a monarchy. It was to guarantee a republican form of government, which means that you truly do select your representatives. We're not doing that. We have a socially engineered Democratic Party frenzily backed by an out-of-control new history mass media. And that's why you have Obama. And you have the threat of Hillary Clinton. Now here's the problem that we've got with our current government, including our current Supreme Court. Somebody commented that the federal government's role has grown so large that we now have a government that basically is a threat to us. It's the very opposite of what the Constitution was intended to secure. So it isn't so much an ideological question of limited government. It's a question of something that's so difficult, so dangerous, and so complex. What it is basically the result of the politicization of a war. And I want to get not to the problem, but the solution. And there is a solution here. And it is to create programs, and I don't mean funded by the U.S. government, but programs for the refugees. Donald Trump has coined an excellent phrase, a safe zone. It's a wonderful way to brand a refugee camp. Now, I've worked with refugees that came here from Southeast Asia. We did things like create newspapers, create business consulting, created educational activities, basically cultural activities, where people could learn about each other's culture. All these things are great. So I have a lot of experience in this, in what usually we call them refugee camps. And they're in third countries. And people stay there until they can qualify for asylum or refugee status in some country. And this is where the vetting has occurred. Now, so far, everybody is refusing to do that, except, I believe, Turkey. But what this program needs to do is not to bring people to the United States, whether they're 3 years old or 40 years old. Basically, these are immigrants. And you know, with all the talk about anti-immigrant this and that, and you know, the Mexican border and H-1B visas, this thing would blow that away. The threat to the workforce, to security, to voting, to the budget, government programs is immense. And all of these people now step in front of the line. They even step in front of the illegal immigrants from Mexico. This is going to cause chaos here if Obama's plan is followed. Now, refugee programs can work. They're highly expensive. And usually, the way we have done immigration programs in our country, I'm sitting in a state, Minnesota, which is clearly one of the last of the great immigrant resettlement programs as they've been traditionally viewed in this country. And that was as part of a westward expansion from the East Coast to, well, the Midwest. And then federal land still extends all the way to the coast of the Pacific, California. But generally, What you did was you got a territory, like Minnesota. You turned it into a state, and you began to resettle immigrants from some country in Europe. Very often, it was because of great hardship. But now we've got to the situation where, because we're seeing these wars on TV, whether we're involved in them or not, there's pressure that everybody wants to get out of there and get to the West, get to Europe, get to here. But the problem that we have here, the biggest problem that we have, is Barack Obama. Barack Obama has an attitude problem about the United States of America. And he stirs up attitude problems about the United States and in the United States against our country. And so it comes down to this. Congress must act. This is not a time for Congress to sit on their hands. Now there are some people, this is turning into another Obamacare thing. Paul Ryan has been elected for one reason or another to be the Speaker. I want to say that the approval of Congress is at historic lows. They're failing, and just because they talk about Obama and the things he's doing, no matter how crazy they are, see, we're in a time of extreme polarization, of extremes on both sides. And Obama is extreme. The Democrats are extreme. Even though there are people who are more so-called progressive and extreme than the elected officials, they are extreme. They're extreme in their partisanship. And on the other side, Republicans are involved in this too. I don't think they're as extreme, and they're trying to play politics with this. But it is not enough to simply argue over whether it's 3-year-olds or whether it's national security. Something has to be done. It needs to be transparent for the American people. And that is why this program must be halted immediately. We've already had some problems. Somebody down in New Orleans, supposedly under the care of a Catholic organization. You know, Catholics all have to be involved in this. They let this guy wander off, and he was one of the so-called refugees. And when they found him, he was up in Washington, D.C. Who knows what could have happened up in Washington, D.C. They placed him in another private home. But these same ISIS terrorists who attack Paris have also said they're going to attack Washington, D.C. We don't know that this kind of thing that happened is not involved in that. Can people get to Washington? Can they team up? Can they follow their orders or their inspiration from ISIS? Okay? So there is a national security issue. But the main thing is that this must be halted until it is transparent. Secondly, the states must have a role here. Now, if Congress acted in 1980 in the Refugee Act, or 2005, as Andrew Napolitano says, to give ultimate power to Obama to do anything he wants with regard to refugees and migrants, then Congress needs to revisit that immediately, and they need to take control of this for the American people and put this out front so that we can do what is the best thing for everybody, including all the Syrians. This is a big deal, and no one's political football. And the American people are sick of political football. That's why 53% of American voters are independents. And in the words of past Supreme Courts who respected voting rights, the voters' political preferences lie outside of the two national parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. We hate it. This is why you have independent candidates leading the Republican Party and challenging the dynasty of the Hill and Bill Clinton crowd. So secondly, the states must have a role. If Congress took that power from the states, if Congress doesn't give it back to them, every one of them has to be swept out in the next election. Every person who does not be forthcoming as to the status of this congressional act, they need to put a halt to it, and then they need to rewrite that bill. And I don't want Obama fighting with them, trying to make political hay about his bad attitude about the United States, okay? So this is transparency. We need to see what's going on. We don't want to see some kind of fight between the liberal press, okay? The people who are the big political players, the newspapers, TV talking heads, like they're running the country, and Barack Obama and the Congress. That's not transparency. And secondly, the state's role has to be restored. This has to be voluntary. And it has to be something that states can control, because we got these police powers, which is the right of the state, the sovereign, to act in its own interest. Not just that it isn't to keep people out of court with sovereign immunity if it treats them badly. That's not the rights of the sovereign states. Sovereign states need to be able to protect their people. And so any program that they get involved in needs to be balanced with their other obligations. If they don't have money for this, including adequate security and law enforcement, then they don't have money. This is another unfunded mandate, where they're dumping, can I use the word, a lot of people in a state, giving them a little money, and then making the state take care of it after that. This is what the states are rejecting. So then the third point is this so-called religious test. This is not a religious test. First of all, let's be very clear. A religious test is for leadership. A religious test is saying you can run for president as long as you're Protestant. Or some countries, as long as you're not with a Muslim party, but you can still be Muslim. In some other countries, it's like you have to be Catholic. These are religious tests. And sometimes, as I said, like in Egypt, they kept people from running because they would run with the religious party whose goal was to overthrow the government and replace it with a theocracy. And this is a big problem. But this is not a religious test. Religious tests are for the leadership. So the idea that we have with no religious test is that anybody, or of any religion, okay, and then it wouldn't have been of no religion back in the day of the framers, the atheists, today the atheists insist that they're a religion. Atheism was not perceived as a religion then. The goal was basically that you don't have a religious test of just one denomination to be a leader. And perhaps, if not a denomination, some kind of religious doctrine that was associated with religious denominations. And so the religious test doesn't have anything to do with refugees in the first place. Secondly, people are not concerned that the people are Muslim if they submit, like all the other denominations that were here before, we all submit to the U.S. Constitution and do not try to overthrow it, or other religions. From what I can see, the Muslims do rely on their faith and should be allowed to keep it and to practice it constitutionally. They don't rely on their faith only in order to attack and repel outsiders through acts of war. They also don't only rely on their faith to impose it on so-called infidels, meaning people who do not share their faith, in a country in which they're the majority. And right now, they try to become a majority in certain areas. Now, they do these things, and they're not acceptable under the U.S. Constitution. But what I see that they think, as much as many of us reject the treatment of children and of women and of others, other men, Islam seems to justify Muslims in their mind to carry out against others acts including atrocities that are based on the social structure set up by that religion, that puts so much power in the hands of a man that others are really reduced to nothing, if not members of his family. Very often, we're seeing really brutal attacks on women that seem to be okay under the Muslim system. So people can, with all these things, people can argue about it and say, oh no, that's not Islam. But it's clear to me that if the Muslim people are going to take root in the United States, they're going to have to transition from a theocracy to a constitutional form of government, in ours specifically, the United States. And so we are going to have to revitalize our courts, including our U.S. Supreme Court, revitalize our laws, and unfortunately revisit a lot of the problems that we now face, where the current Supreme Court has changed our marriage laws. Even the court said it was a change from over 2,000 years, which is far older than this country. But they still did it because they thought it was something that they liked, so that it should be in the Constitution, as Scalia said. They put that in the Constitution. We have abortion in the Constitution, supposedly, killing more than 50 million human fetuses, selling body parts while benefiting from U.S. taxpayer money, which this court refused to review. These are atrocities. And if you throw the Muslim community into the mix, now right now they practice polygamy. So that is a policy issue that will need to be addressed, polygamy. And we all know that Muslim voters went along with the homosexuals and everything, turning marriage into some kind of circus, where it's entertainment now to see what sex people are going to be from day to day. It's a circus, bread and circuses. And the Muslims have probably gone along with this because it allows them the flexibility of polygamy. But these kinds of what the press has called social issues, these are basic living issues. issues of basic life. A lot of the basic living issues, like the lack of economic opportunity and jobs and education, and basically social inequalities, mass incarceration, unfair laws, etc., those are generally left unaddressed. So we need to allow the states to address these things. Marriage and abortion need to be put back in the hands of the states. Protect life, protect marriage and the family. Decide what is the least constitutional protection which a court can rationally find in the Constitution in these areas. Not like Obergefell, turning marriage into a circus. And give it to the states. Do not federalize this, including federalizing it in the U.S. Supreme Court. There are many areas in which the federal courts have deferred to the states. We need to go back to that. And people can say, no, we think it should be a new Supreme Court order. What do they call that? New World Order? This is an NSO. It's just like the federal constitutional amendments, giving women the vote or giving young people the vote. A lot of people thought that would help them, their certain party. These new sweeping Supreme Court decisions are just like this. And what they should have done is to allow the states to operate so that women and young people could vote responsibly in states that have power to determine their own success and to further the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should protect some real, basic, and actually to further their own society. Now, the Supreme Court should protect some real, basic federal constitutional rights. Remember that in the Supreme Court, slavery used to be thought to be allowable because the federal Supreme Court would not address slavery, and it was all located in the states, and because slaves were viewed as chattel and property of a householder in the state. So the federal government could not interfere. Now the states really have control over nothing. So anything the states try to do will be attacked by the federal court, the Supreme Court. And this is a very troubling trend. So if we're going to bring all the new religious immigrant Muslims into the program, into the states with transparency, without a religious test, then we are going to have to return power to the states and let community truly under the Constitution take hold. So this is a big ramification. The other thing about religion is, of course, that any Christian who lives in a community where ISIS is going around over there, slaughtering them, trying to convert them, or else cutting off their head and putting it on TV, burning them alive, etc., drowning, all of these things which Obama tolerates, I think it is making him a madman. He justifies these things in his head, and he's all alone, and he's now purporting to make these great, grand decisions and accusing all the Republicans of being afraid of 3-year-old orphans. Otherwise, they do what he says. We can't tolerate the continuing persecution and slaughter of Christians. We need to give them asylum. We need to give them asylum in Europe. We need to give them asylum in the United States. Now, if there are other cases, a well-founded fear of persecution if someone returns to their homeland, then they need to be given asylum too. This includes any Muslims who have a well-founded fear of persecution. Not just that they're in a war. Now, these Christians are not in a war with anybody. They are persecuted just because of their Christianity. It's obvious. Their killers are boasting about it. They're making a propaganda show of it over there in Syria and Iraq. We also then, fourthly, need to restore the border. The New York Times just noted with apparently great pride that ISIS had erased a historical border, like it's some kind of great accomplishment. And this has been the trend, where Obama, immediately with his administration, decided to give that land to this so-called caliphate. He enlisted people to fill a vacuum, and Hillary Clinton did to fill a vacuum, with a supposed caliphate. Gave them the land. Congress has to reverse this in a declaration of war, which hopefully can be successfully concluded in a much shorter time frame than has gone on already, because of the lack of organization, because of the lack of leadership by the White House, by the Department of State, and making basically politically motivated decisions, and not well-founded, well-led, transparent, not a bipartisan immigration policy which respects the states as sovereign. For all these reasons, we are creating a hell on earth. We need to change this into a safe zone, using our military, not to overthrow Assad or fight Russia, not to solve all the sectarian problems in the Muslim world, not to lead an assault against white people or Christians or normal American marriages, nor to create a new history, but to use our expertise, those who have it, not those who are undercutting our democracy and actually threatening our republic, to help all those in Syria and Iraq. This gruesome and nightmarish aftermath started because Democrats wanted an easy way out, to prove their supposed success in Iraq and Afghanistan, blaming the al-Maliki government, blaming Assad. Good way to get out. Now they won't stop the charade. Let's get back to democracy. Let's not taunt and threaten the states, no matter what party is leading them. Let's let them be Americans. And let's show the world and the Middle East that we stand for something. We have given Barack Obama the courtesy of allowing him to serve as president. Now we need to show the same courtesy to the Middle East, to Assad, to Putin, to the current leaders of Iraq, that we will honor their countries and their right to govern themselves, that we do not support any kind of sectarian warfare there, and will demand peace and order and human rights. We will not pretend to elevate the status of women or homosexuals in their societies, but demand human rights and a decent level of civilization. And in our treatment of refugees, we will demand the same humanitarian standards. And we are not. We must cooperate in using military force to stop the killings of innocent, unarmed people, what Obama accepts by simply explaining to us that he is an expert on Muslims, and these are not Muslims. And we can perhaps best lead by enforcing our own constitution in our own country. If there are Muslims, they must understand that they must assimilate to our concept of constitutional rights. And the Supreme Court must get out of the business of politics and withdraw from politics, from gender wars against the United States, race wars against the United States, threatening the franchise, the right to vote. They must respect the states and let them have their peace and tranquility. As I have long said, if elected president, I will demand and work with a new Congress, not to create a new history, but to restore constitutional values of religious liberty and all our constitutional values. But religious liberty means working for the goals and within the framework of our Constitution of a free people. We all love 3-year-olds of any race or religion, and we all love widows, because our Constitution is founded on their dignity, despite the utter disgrace of the Supreme Court of the United States in backing slavery, just as Muslims today continue to back slavery. We will lead a path to humanity based on our freedom to worship God and to follow His commands, including the life, liberty, and happiness promised to us in our Declaration of Independence through His providence, and secured by our federal Constitution, with ample sovereignty for the individual states to pursue success in their own right and thus strengthen the entire nation. Transparency, active role for participating states, no force, no religious test, but asylum if targeted for religion or other political persecution. And finally, restoring the borders and a safe zone in Syria and Iraq. Not sectarian civil war. We must never manipulate or participate in a sectarian civil war. These are the 4 principles which will allow us to act according to our real values and Constitution and protect the peoples of Syria and Iraq in a truly American way. I'm Steve Carlson, and I'm running for president, a write-in campaign for President of the United States in 2016, and I ask for your vote. And I thank you for listening, and let's work together to do what is best for all the people involved here, including the Syrian refugees, but including all Americans and also the Iraqis, and to bring peace and stability to the West, and to point a way forward that only America can point.